I'm Theron, Ramacharaka. I'm going to give you two little articles that I wrote. I would say in about the years 2003 or 2004. One is called Everybody Has an Opinion About Our Current War with Iraq. And the other one is called Integrity and Verbal Vomit. Now, the first one about the war with Iraq, I wrote in response to my local newspaper's solicitation for letters to the editor. There was a period when the local newspaper in the little town I live in currently in Pennsylvania asked for people's opinions about the Iraqi war. And they had been printing a few for several days, a few such articles or letters. So I wrote one, and it did not get accepted for publication. And I don't think it was my writing style that kept it from being printed. I think it was the nature of the opinion. I have been published elsewhere, so I don't think it was my writing style. What I did notice about the letters that did get published is that they were opinions that were very much in favor of the war, or ones that spoke against it, just to add, to give a counter view or the other side of opinions about the war. But they were very washed out, kind of mainstream thinking, like war is bad, just generally accepted notions about war itself. As I recall, those were the 2 points of view that were being accepted. Nothing very pointed or poignant. Mine didn't get accepted. Now, I'm going to read this one to you. I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. I'm going to get it published one way or the other, I guess. Now, it's written from the point of view that terrorists from the Middle East attacked the World Trade Center. Since the days when I wrote this, have amended that point of view. I now, by now, have more closely looked at whatever evidence there was, footage and so forth of planes striking the World Trade Center, and there's something very fishy about all of that. And I've come to the conclusion, along with hearing, other things like some insider views about a planned attack on the World Trade Center, planned by people in our own government and in our own banking system, that just tell me that the whole thing was a big scam. But back then, in 2003 or 2004, when I wrote this, I did not yet have that clear a picture of what happened, but there was still plenty fishy in my thinking right from the start. I had just accepted a job in New York State, up in the Newburgh or Marlborough area of New York, and I lost my job. I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast with my wife, who I had just married. We moved to the East Coast because I got a job, a pretty good job, as an operations manager at an organic produce farm, and I lost my job 2 weeks later on the grounds that the World Trade Center thing made the business fall apart. Now, this was an upstate business, yeah, but 50% of the clients were downtown Manhattan restaurants. And those restaurants all shut down for a good while. So my position as operations manager became untenable with respect to being able to pay me. So I lost my job. So I was impacted by it, and so I along with the rest of the world, for whatever reasons, thought more into it all, and it didn't take me but like maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes to figure out there was a lot fishy going on with the whole thing. And that fishiness became more and more apparent to me as time went on. And I noticed that my thinking about it slowly became some other people's thinking over the years, over the subsequent years, that many people, even today, still seem to be kind of blind to the fishiness of the whole thing, even if they hear reports of the fishiness about it. And I was surprised that more people didn't understand what I'm calling fishiness of the matter early on. It just kind of amazed me, which is what instigated my writing this. And the other article that I wrote about the integrity and verbal vomit kind of is a follow-up to the first one here. So anyway, here's what I wrote, and which was not accepted for publication into a local newspaper around here. Everybody has an opinion about our current war with Iraq. And here's mine in a nutshell. Something's wrong. Now understand, I do not consider myself to be an expert in political affairs or foreign policy. I don't even claim allegiance to a political party or to a specific political perspective. I'm just an average guy who grew up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and who has served in the United States Armed Forces, and then went on to get a Bachelor's of Arts in philosophy at the University of California at Berkeley, and a Bachelor's of Science in Business Information Technology in Phoenix, Arizona. Information directly feeding my opinion of the war comes solely from what we all hear through the media. My opinion, however, is filtered through my knowledge of formal argument, rhetoric, analytical reasoning, sophistry, propaganda, and of argumentative and communicative fallacies. So what's wrong? Well, for one, I believe we're getting hoodwinked regarding this war in many ways. Let's go back to the search for bin Laden. Terrorists typically could be characterized as sociopathic fanatics who mass murder innocent people in a guerrilla warfare fashion, generally to prove a point. Terrorists cannot be tolerated. Apparently, bin Laden served as a ringleader for the 9/11 attacks, which took place on American soil. So Bush went after him. Okay, I said apparently. Assuming that the appearance is the actual state of affairs. All right, Bush went after him, fair enough. But did Bush state any acknowledgement to us that he considered what political or social points from which those heinous terrorist acts arose? Not that I heard, read, or saw. Going after the attackers, or the alleged attackers, is one thing. Paying attention to why they attacked is another. The message I seemed to get is that the attacks were a way of saying, we're sick and tired of the United States meddling around in other people's affairs and trying to run the world, and of the United States playing the two-faced bully in the process. Talk about tyranny. Now, I do not believe our federal administration gave the message much thought. And I think a lot of us missed that fact because 9/11 was atrocious and therefore appeared to give plenty of reason to ignore whatever message it was meant to deliver. And of course, remember, this is on the assumption that there was a bona fide terrorist attack masterminded by bin Laden or some group of terrorists dissociated with our own government and business. But let's face it, how else would somebody get an important message through to what they perceive to be a giant, self-righteous bully who just won't listen and who just won't stop meddling. In other words, it is true that the terrorist acts, if they were unforgivable. Well, they were terrorist acts. It's just a matter of who are the real terrorists. That's the point of view now. But I'm going back here again to what I wrote from the point of view that I had then. It is true that the terrorist acts were unforgivable, but why would the United States be under such outlandish attack, if not for having created some rather large and unforgivable insults in the minds of others? Well, so then came the War on Terror. That was to be payback for the damage created on 9/11. All right, fair enough. But it was also to stop any future occurrences. Now that's far-fetched. Who in their right minds actually believes that such a war can ever be realistic? It could go on for centuries. Only a country that believes it can actually police the world would come up with such an idea. And only a citizenry who believes that their country can actually police the world could fall into step with such an idea. Better to deal with the immediate attack to bring down as many responsible parties as possible and then leave it alone. And to pay the overall message some serious mind. Anything else would only prove the opposition's point. We ignored the message and then expanded our retaliation for 9/11 to an all-out war on terror for conceivably the rest of time. Well, we didn't find bin Laden. In large, all the hype about finding him and prosecuting him proved uneventful. But will the United States ever admit failure or mistakenness? Probably not during our lifetimes. So, before most Americans had a chance to clear their minds and realized that our war on terror flopped, we smoothly blended the enterprise into one involving the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. After all, we all remembered him from not too long ago. As far as we Americans know, though, Saddam hasn't done anything out of the ordinary for 10 years. But anyway, now we have the big search for Saddam going on. Another big search. As though he is who we were after in the first place. Well, this way, the war with Iraq appears to be an extension. Wow. That whole file just closed. I need to get it back here. Excuse me. I don't know what happened. I didn't touch it. Poltergeist in the room. I found it again. Yeah. But anyway, here we go. Now we have the big search for Saddam going on, as though he is who we were after in the first place. Well, this way, the war with Iraq appears to be an extension of the war on terror, or falls under the umbrella of the war on terror. Americans get to feel that the overall mission is still on track. And that it's all perfectly justified as part of the big 9/11 aftermath. Incidentally, I've heard a few people talking about Saddam in a very confused manner. And I do not doubt that confusion comes from the way our government has presented the affair. These people say, yes, we should go kill him. Just kill him and any other Arab like that. After what he did on September 11th. And they're saying that about Saddam Hussein. That's a little confused. That's like a lot of confusion added to a lot of confusion, following a lot of confusion about a lot of confusion. Well, the fact is Saddam did nothing on September 11th. How misled can people be about this whole thing? The first we heard about Saddam in Iraq since the search for bin Laden was that we suspected Saddam might have some weapons of mass destruction intended for terrorist use. We started pressuring Iraq to stop this nonsense, and we asked for proof one way or the other. Now, I'm not siding with anybody over whether Iraq actually has such weapons. I'm driving at the fact that we, the American people, never heard any proof that Iraq has such weapons. All we heard was ambiguous and non-committal rhetoric about so-called intelligence reports that pointed to possibilities. Yet there we are, fighting away on Iraqi land, much against the general world's recommendations. And I'll add here, now that we know a lot more about what really took place over there, not just fighting away on Iraqi land, but committing atrocities, terrorist acts, and torture, breaking every rule in the book, much against the general world's recommendations. And now what's our big stated reason for being there? Remember the year in which I wrote this, when I say now. Now our big stated reason there is to liberate Iraq. Well, that's a convenient change of story. But if being a convenient change of story is not enough to knock it flat out of believability, perhaps the fact that we never heard that Iraqi people asked us to liberate them does. And for God's sakes, why go against UN advice just to liberate Iraq who didn't ask for it? Something's wrong. What? I'm not sure. But I know we could have targeted numerous countries on the grounds of possible mass destruction weapons, or on the grounds of liberation. Why Iraq? What's different about Iraq? Let's see. Oil? Geographic strategy? What's different about Saddam? Just a familiar bad guy from the past? I suspect that this war amounts to a control issue. I do not, however, suspect that we have been lied to, misled, hoodwinked, bamboozled, or propagandized into believing that the United States is doing the right thing in the right way and for all the right reasons, when in fact, quite likely, none of those are true. I feel convinced of that, not suspicious of it. I heard a popular radio personality state lately that anybody who does not support the war or who speaks against it is anti-American. Perhaps some of you can figure out just from that rhetoric, that style of speaking, who I'm talking about. This radio personality claims to have a firm grip on clear thinking and on democracy. Both. Maybe you know who I'm talking about now. Well, I say he's wrong on both accounts. It is entirely possible to be American, support American ideals, love America, and wish our troops safety and wellness, and not support the war and even speak out against it. In fact, I'd say that regarding the current state of affairs, loving America and speaking out against this war are entirely consistent with one another. And it is due to our democracy-oriented Constitution that I can say that. What is not a part of our Constitution is our populace's apparent inability to actually change much at all in our government, to stop the lies, to stop the world policing, to stop the buffoonery. Anybody who gets up enough power to do that, whether American or otherwise, soon gets gassed out and shot down. We Americans should be about getting sick of it, too. I believe terrorists will leave us alone. And remember, this was on the the assumption that terrorists from foreign lands were all behind this whole thing. I believe terrorists will leave us alone when we ourselves get so sick of our own government's buffoonery that we find a way to put a lid on it in a humanitarian manner. What's the old saying? Clean up your own act first? Well, that was the article that didn't, the letter to the editor that did not get printed. Now I'm going to go on to what's more relevant today here. Integrity and verbal vomit. Quite a title, I know. Spend enough pennies and you've soon spent $1. Give up enough small bits of freedom and you end up with a major chunk of it gone. With a major chunk of it gone, there's nothing left to work with in order to recoup the losses. We've given up or lost too much already. But maybe it's not yet time to throw in the towel. And remember, once again, I wrote this about 10 years ago. The human spirit thrives on love and freedom. The familiar phrase, if you love somebody, set him free, roughly describes how the two work together. Love and freedom. But while the two are not entirely separate issues, here we're addressing only freedom, liberty. Last time I checked, the United States of America came together due to the fact that freedom of thought, expression, and livelihood were bound and stifled by priests and royalty in the old world, and on the principle that human dignity and progressive development require an environment in which such binds do not exist. Our founding fathers composed the Constitution defining how the state will operate, and then composed the amendments to protect the natural rights of humans from the power of the state as given in the Constitution, and thereby to protect human dignity and the freedom of spirit. But what has happened? It didn't take long for the state to come up with ways to chip away at our rights, our freedom, our dignity. And what have we done but in large allow it to happen? Take an example. We have the right to overthrow the government. Why did the Founding Fathers recognize and formally put this right into print? Because they had the foresight and the experience from the old world to know that any government left to its own devices or vices will gain too much power over people. It will become an enemy of those people's freedom and therefore to their human dignity. Politically, this would defeat the central purpose behind the establishment of the New World. On a humanistic measure, this would put humanity in the exact oppressing situation from which it attempted to escape and which it aimed to avoid in the future. Now, why do most United States citizens fail to comprehend that our freedom and dignity took a severe blow the moment we allowed our government to get too powerful to overthrow? That should frighten all people who can understand normal thinking. I mean, it's kind of terrifying. Consider the implications. Consider the actual consequences. And as a side note here, an interjection into my own article, I say that now we're living in the consequences, the implications. Consider the potential for power to take over for justice. Consider the natural course of the controlling power of government in our lives. Say 200 years after our loss of ability to overthrow that government. Consider that the Founding Fathers actually knew what they were safeguarding against, that they knew what the hell they were talking about. Sad, isn't it? and quite foolish that effectively we gave up that important right to overthrow the government long ago. Effectively, hindsight over that does little good. I wonder how many people stood up at the right time and said that government should be overthrown now in order to preserve our rightful ability to do so. A powerful and necessary righting action, even when not implemented. It is the deterrent to government over-empowerment and oppression. Our loss of it is only one of myriad examples to which to point, examples of the actual state of affairs, or examples of the actual affairs of the state. I'm certain that back then, while memories of revolution still hung in the air, a significant number of people would have spoken up on this matter in this manner. Now, I wonder how many people ignored the warnings. How many people shrugged them off with rationalizations like, yeah, well, I don't see anything more than just us sticking with something that's already in place, since it seems to be working okay enough. We who can look back and see what chain of changes consequently came to pass, if we're not thinking with bad brains, realize that more than 50% of the population couldn't think straight over such an obvious and important thing. We realize that because of the outcome. In fact, we realized that back then they must have gone out of their way to avoid straight thinking over it, because of the outcome. We realized that because of the warnings. What a letdown. They screwed us. But with those realizations in mind, it is far more of a letdown that people today, in large, think about each one in an endless string of constant small losses of control over our lives in the same stuck on stupid way as did the majority who screwed us up back then. I just don't get the stupidity behind that. It's not just a matter of making a sham out of learning from history for more than half a century at a time, but also a matter of not learning from one election to the next, or from one billing cycle to the next, or from one new law to the next. If the Founding Fathers could get out of their graves and talk, all of this would be their speech. That is, unless as ordinary citizens they too by now would have put on blinders. Or unless as high-ranking government officials they by now would have got personally excited over their power over other people's lives and gave up their old ideals. Or unless then they by now would have got personally excited over the high society lifestyles they could live as contemporary members of the legislative and executive branches of government. Barring those, all of this would be their speech. They would tell us the point here, that little by little, our federal government is sanctioning, enabling, and executing measures which chip away at our rights, our liberties, and thereby our dignity. Big business is in the same mix, and big banking, chipping away at our abilities to earn and to keep money. They would go on to make the rest of the point, that we seem to allow these things to happen. This is what our Founding Fathers would say if they could get out of their graves and speak. That we seem to allow these things to happen, and that we're rushing toward feeling much the sorrier for it. Many people do not even see it happening, though. And I think that they really ought to wake up to the truth and at least make considerable noise about it. There are no more uncharted land masses that we can go conquer with muskets for the purposes of starting a new government grounded in freedom and dignity. There aren't any more. It baffles me how that people who in earlier years of their lives clearly comprehended the insinuating diminishing of our liberties and affluence at the hands of government and business and banking, how that they now fail to comprehend it in their middle to later years of life. If we are going to exist with dignity, we Americans need to keep our eyes and our ears on the truth of our society and not become blind or dulled to it through life. If we are going to survive with dignity, we Americans must cease easily giving up our liberties, our rights, and our capacity to have adequate money for reasonably comfortable livelihoods. This seems a little outdated now as I read it through. This is 10 years later. People who once comprehended these facts and their urgency, but who no longer do in their middle or later years, utterly baffle me. This group of people has no excuse, not even ignorance of the truth as an excuse. A second group of people does have an excuse. It has the mental tools to comprehend the truth, but remains ignorant of it. Members of this group need help in encountering the facts in an intelligible form. They also need encouragement and community support in taking an active role in their lives as American human beings with their own human dignity at stake. I propose that the first group take off its blinders, restore some of its earlier vigor and purpose, and galvanize its by now hard-earned resources into some usefulness, at least to help with this second group. The first group has forgotten that a consequential struggle to preserve what human dignity there is, let alone to recover what has got lost in recent decades, requires the lifelong participation of citizens. This first group's notion that such social effort stops at the age of 20 or 30 or for some other reason reaches absurdity. It is living suicide. Anybody who says or does nothing in this matter is either ignorant or unsupportive of human dignity. The second group needs help, and the first group has no excuse. Could it be true that what I suggest is happening to our rights, our liberties, and our dignity isn't really happening? Am I just making it up? No, I'm not. I promise. Am I hallucinating it? No, I don't hallucinate. Am I just paranoid? Oh, well, that comes close to suggesting that I hallucinate. Just paranoid? No, not just paranoid. Do I, however, feel frightened about it? At one level of my being and awareness, yeah. I am constantly learning to overcome fear. But the information, the knowledge, the awareness of affairs, the content of that awareness is frightening stuff. It has a frightening aspect, certainly. It is the content here that is frightening. It is not such a matter that paranoia or fear is contriving the content. That is not the case. So just paranoid? No. Seen in the light of day, that is with the blinders off, the content itself, as I said, is frightening. And it will not change for the better or even stay the same without action from all of us. Remember, government left to its own vices strongly tends to move in the preferred direction with respect to these issues. Why? Well, it's a matter of human tendencies to control other people when a good opportunity arises. To take advantage of power, to exercise greed, to waste resources that appear to be plentiful, to waste what comes freely, to monopolize, to condescend, to want more than what is necessary, to taint policy and procedure with personal agendas, to profit, to enslave, to lie, to kill, to self-preserve, to deceive, to manipulate, etc. We look at foreign governments and have little trouble seeing these tendencies carried out in them, and we say, how horrible. Why do we have so much trouble seeing it in our own government and recognizing the corresponding effects in our lives? I propose that the answers are blinders, apathy, and busyness, just trying to survive in a complicated technological lifestyle. But moreover, I propose that the answers include feelings of powerlessness and the tacit understanding that major government uprooting would severely upset our lifestyles, no matter how upset they already are. Feelings of powerlessness and unwillingness to sacrifice the status quo, when such sacrifice could mean a total loss of comfortable living or could invite violence from the government. I would say those are the main reasons. But wait, just to support a point here, don't those two reasons in themselves suggest a government that is too damn powerful and frightening? When was the last time we felt that our government is by the people? The only thing by the people about it is the fact that people are employed in government jobs. Oh, and the notion that we vote now and then, which is its own sad story in more ways than one. On the business side, when was the last time we felt that big business was doing much for anybody or for anything other than its own bottom line and the lifestyles of its own executives? Is telemarketing invading our lives enough yet? And this was 10 years ago, we're calling. Is it hard enough yet to gain employment with a criminal record? Do we have to straighten out enough bills every month yet? Do utilities surcharge us enough yet? Do we buy enough misrepresented or dysfunctional products yet? Just how aware of bad business ethics must we consumers yet get? Are we re-engineered out of jobs enough yet? Are we alienated enough yet from good and affordable medical care? Do we yet worry enough about our retirement capacities? Are we tired enough yet of wasting time trying to communicate with businesses? Do we feel sick enough yet of paying for high-cost legal necessities, such as insurances and lawyers, and increasingly getting ripped off in return? Are we tired enough yet of trying to survive on petty paychecks involving 25-cent raises in the face of living costs that increase much more than do the pitiful raises? On and on we could go here. And what of the government again? Are we even aware that these days we must verbally affirm to a law enforcement officer our right to privacy prior to a questionable search for that right to be effectively defended in a subsequent court of law? It seems that that inalienable right is very alienable these days. And if we don't have the savvy and the nerve to clarify others and to do so at the right time into the often stern or threatening face of a cop who could easily dish out heavy physical and legal damage without further provocation, consider that. Consider it for real, I mean. Don't merely say, yeah, well, whatever. Because whatever, because I don't do things that make me have to worry about that. If you say that, you've proven yourself to easily or even willfully miss the point. And you've proven yourself to be non-compass mentis regarding where such trends are slowly but surely leading with all of our individual lives. Use your brains. Are we aware that these days we have little to no access to the truth regarding our government's plans, its actions, its reasons, and its knowledge? Do we pay enough taxes yet? Are we aware yet that many social conditions that existed in the former Soviet Union, which we strongly condemned, exist now for us? Conditions such as post-Patriot Act loss of privacy in telecommunications. All United States domestic phone calls are now recorded, digitized, condensed, and stored for later review. Should any tip-off or investigation occur, suggesting the probability of substantiating or winning a case using a history of phone call content as evidence of illegal activities. This includes landline calls. Of course, this surveillance occurs in the good name of domestic security. Well, the Soviet Union had a similar explanation for it. It also is known that in the Soviet Union you had to watch what you said in public unless you wanted to come under government scrutiny for it. Link those two ideas together. Now we have to watch what we say in public over here in the United States. And that was 10 years ago. As a country and as individuals. Back then we came down on the Soviet Union's practices, even to the point of expressing hatred and fear of Soviet citizens. So how are we to now feel about other countries' citizens the way they feel about us? Or might feel about us? Yeah, but now we don't come down on our own increasingly similar practices? I'm asking that rhetorically, in disbelief of the fact that U.S. citizens currently say little about it. They seem to miss the obvious facts and the corresponding implications. Well, is it good government when ours does it to us, but bad government when some other people's government does it to them, or what? What sick but evidently well-used thinking is that? That's not even ethnocentrism at work, which is the more frequent blocker of clear reasoning and cross-cultural comparisons. No, this is worse. Worse for us. This is a sort of blind man's ethnocentrism, or grossly misdirected ethnocentrism, for it assumes that our own government could not possibly be like the bad ones. Or it assumes that admitting that our government is like the bad ones, or simply is one of the bad ones, causes us to lose our individual integrity. But then the result of this thinking is not even in our own favor. In fact, it plays a large role in slowly devastating us as a group and as individuals. That's how misdirected it is. That's how ignorant and sick that it is. It is a blasphemy to reason itself. It involves the awareness level of a slug and the thinking capacity of a buffoon. Do we notice that more about us each year turns into government knowledge? Have we had enough relatives and friends get needlessly incarcerated yet? Are we curious yet over having the world's highest per capita incarceration rate? Have we tired yet of feeling helplessly locked into the status quo? Are we tired enough yet of police encroaching into our lives? Do we have enough nausea yet that people feel increasingly encouraged to call law enforcement to settle minor disputes? Do we have enough nausea yet over that? And by the way, why the hell are we inviting law enforcement and other government presences to exist as intimate controlling forces in our lives? This is really stupid. To what good could it possibly lead? A lot of this stuff is our own damn fault. The problem is that once government gets large enough and powerful enough to hold off overthrow or major change, it gets to be too late really fast. For us, the affair started getting too late a long time ago, relatively shortly after the Bill of Rights got rolled out and implemented. We don't notice business and government chipping away at us, or we don't really care. We don't notice that we complain about some little increase in business or in our government or in government dictatorship over our lives and then forget about it as soon as some new encroachment comes along. Well, I notice it. I see people doing it all the time. I see people treating the situation as though small things don't add up to big major problems. I'd like to know how we could forget from one encroachment to the next that the encroachments don't stop. It's like spending pennies and thinking that they will never add up to a dollar spent. How is it that we do not notice how that little so-called acceptable encroachments into our lives often even occur in nearly predictable sequences, such that over a period of time, major encroachments have occurred to which nobody would have ever agreed? That's like spending all those pennies, but not even remembering having done it from one penny to the next. Or is it just a matter of not really caring? If that's it, we're lost. Sunk. If that's it, we might as well turn in all of our money right now, drink the juice, and lie down and die. I hear people who used to be more aware, more concerned. Remember, I was referring to two groups of people, this being the first one. This group being that first one. They used to be more aware, more concerned. They seem to still momentarily comprehend the factual points of concern, but then they shrug them away with some rationalization or other, and they say things like, yes, of course, it's a bit frightening to give up telephone security, but hey, I'm not doing anything illegal. Another rationalization is, yeah, but hey, it's just a little while, while there's a terrorist threat. Or, yeah, but that's too many calls to monitor all the time. These rationalizations not only totally miss the point, but some of them make no sense in the real world anyway. But hey, it's just while there's a terrorist threat is one of those that makes no sense. A citizen's privacy goes out the window if there exists reason to believe the citizen may have involvement with terrorist activity. It's true, but there exists no clear definition of what would constitute involvement in terrorist activity. Hell, that could be any activity at all, with the right spin put on it. And don't think law enforcement people always see people's activities in their true light, or that they always put beneficial spins on people's activities. And don't believe that law enforcement people don't look for ways to be heroes or to flat out ruin other people's lives. Don't be that naive. Plus, when will there no longer exist a terrorist threat? Come on now. How many centuries will that take? Here's a good one. How many of us already have forgotten that we're supposedly waiting for the Patriot Act to go back out of effect? To the best of my memory, as a side note here, I wrote this before Patriot Act 2 came into effect, which, as I've been led to believe, states that Patriot Act 1 is permanent. See, by the time Patriot Act 2 came along, people had already tended to forget that we were supposedly waiting for the Patriot Act to go out of effect. How many of us foolishly believe that our government would actually give up its newly legitimized invasiveness into our private lives? But hey, it's just while there's a terrorist threat. It does have correspondence with the real world. And because it has correspondence with the real world, it falls into the category of rational thinking. In other words, it's not complete gibberish, rational language, but it makes no sense. It's valid talk, but it's completely fouled up. Even if it made sense, it still misses the point so thoroughly that it makes me question the mind that believed it had any relevance. People who know better than that, but who say these things, they baffle me. They worry me. They sound a lot like a president slinging a president's typical verbal vomit. We better start figuring out ways to save what freedom, lifestyle, and dignity we have left. For government and big business and big banking are not going to change their course if left to their own vices. Trust me on that. It's a downhill rolling snowball, running us over and is getting larger, heavier, and faster every day. As a society, we have no excuse. Why do nothing and thereby help to create a more impossible situation for our children and for theirs? That's despicable. It's not yet time to throw in the towel, to put it very lightly. We still have more dignity than that, I think. Well, that's the end of that article. That was 10 years ago. It seems that now things have progressed to the point where the only thing we can do, really, is say goodbye to the United States of America and elevate our idea of what we can do to the level of consciousness itself. Consider it now to no longer be just a war or whatever on terror. Nah. War on consciousness, folks. Take care of our own consciousness. Rise above the entire mentality itself, the entire scope of the effect of a war against human consciousness. True selfhood, self-actualization, personal evolution, before it's too late to do even that. And yeah, if you're going to say, oh, but nothing can stop that, nothing, it can never become too late for that, think again. Don't fall into the same slothful, sluggish, buffoonish thinking that got us to this point. Think again.